My name's Michael Fredericks. I've been with DEA since it was created in 1973. My federal career actually started in 1971 with the Customs, in the Bureau of Customs. During that period of time, there were a lot of hijackings, international and so forth, under the Nixon administration, and they decided to enhance the Sky Marshal program. So I started, technically, the name was Customs Security Officer, was known at the time as Sky Marshal. I came aboard on January 1971 and served in that capacity, flying to the Far East, and no domestic flights, all international flights to the Sky Marshal until September of 71. I was promoted to Special Agent with Customs. So I was with Customs Office of Investigations. And then late 72, I was assigned to the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, the ODALE program, which was a combination. It was like a street-level task force. We had state, local, county police, narcotics officers, and so forth, combined with, at the time, BNDD, the predecessor of DEA, Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, rather than using the acronym, and alcohol, tobacco, firearms. We had an intelligence agent from the Internal Revenue Service and various federal agencies. And then July 1st, 1973, DEA was created, and it combined the resources, the old Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, and about half the 1811s that they called special agents as a job category, and they put them together. It took about 500 customs agents and combined them with the former DNDD staff agents and so forth, created the Drug Enforcement Administration. So I was with DEA until I retired in September of 2000. Just telling you earlier, one of my claims of success was avoiding the headquarters building. 28 years in my career, they caught up to me because I had a good run. I had about 15 consecutive years, what we call Oconos, outside the United States. And then they caught up to me. 1998 brought me into headquarters, spent a couple of years, and retired in 2000. The global DEA's initiatives and programs is important because I think if you look historically, nearly all, if not all, the drugs, the illicit drugs and drug abuse problems that the United States have incurred over the years are from foreign, international, overseas sources, whether it's opium, heroin, cocaine, and various drugs coming from Southeast Asia, Southwest Asia, Mexico, South America, and so forth. So it's very important, I think, for DEA to maintain high level of flow to operations, to be able to coordinate with foreign governments, foreign law enforcement, foreign policymakers to align foreign government policies with the United States policy as far as drug control, whether it be enforcement, education, whatever. Because I think, if I can add just one thing, I think historically, if you go back, as early as 1875, when the Customs Service integrated into that type of enforcement, in addition to revenue collection, there were a series of laws, anti-narcotics, anti-drug, counter-drug, whatever term you want to use, that started around 1909 and ran through 1927, a series, including the Harrison Narcotics Act and others, to control opium smuggling, opium use, production, and so forth, then heroin, as they elevated into cocaine, codeine, and so forth. 1927, the Customs Service initiating what they call the agency service for customs agents. And then in 1930, the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, FBN, was created to counter a lot of the opium and morphine, primarily morphine use, that stemmed from World War II, from wartime. World War I, and then subsequently, after that, they started creating these counter-drug initiatives and agencies. And at that very time, those agents, the customs agents and the FBN agents who overseas, FBN from the very get-go was, they were stationed in London, Bangkok, Rome, across the world, as well as working in Mexico and Canada as the customs agents, who were known at the time as treasury agents. How do the international operations improve safety and security here at home? I think is a answer a little bit from the previous question. I talked about how you have to integrate enforcement, like policies, anti-drug policies, and so forth, foreign governments, foreign countries, source countries, whether it be a source country like Thailand or previously Burma, in Myanmar, or Mexico, or whatever the source country is. Not only do those countries have to be in the loop with U.S. policy, but so do transit countries. For instance, Western Europe. You may have a source for heroin in Southeast Asia that then trains to Western Europe to get to the United States. Or you may have a source for cocaine in South America. It will transit the Eastern Caribbean to island nations, down what they call down island in that area, to get to the United States. So to protect the homeland, to protect our citizens from use and abuse, essentially, it's integral that we have an extended, expanding global initiatives worldwide.
I went to Colombia in April of 1983, and it was crazy. It was chaotic. Bombings, shootings, a lot of things going on. It changed rapidly 83 and 84 into early 85 as well because of the campaigns that the cartels had against Americans in particular. They did a bombing thing in November, I believe, of 84. They targeted anything American. IBM, the American school, the American embassy, the ambassador's residence, anything like that. And I got caught up in a lot of that because I was a new guy. So I would go out into the jungles with the cops and sometimes the military to raid these coca labs, the cultivations, the processing areas, and so forth. And it was interesting because I was having a great time. It was adrenaline fueled, and I was, as they say, ripping and running, going out and blowing things up and everything. It was very difficult on the family. My son, at the age of 4 years old, came up to me one day he came back, he was in pre-kindergarten, and his little van that they used to take him to and from school was armored. And then they'd have a chase car behind that. 3 guys in a chase car with machine guns or shotguns, whatever, to escort the kids. And I went out to meet him on the front stoop one day, or the curb, and he says, "Daddy, I know why we have such thick glass on my school bus." I said, "Why's that?" He says, "Bad men are trying to kill us." At 4 years old, that was kind of a wake-up call for me because I was having a good time, but it was tough on the family. It was very tough on the family. But if I can tell you one little story, an anecdote, after we got there in, like I say, April of 83. By Christmas, we were kind of getting settled in. And we would communicate with my parents by sending videotapes back and forth. So I borrowed the office video camera, took it home for Christmas to make a Christmas video to send to the folks, and was going to reassure them. Whatever you read in the newspapers, it's not that bad. Things are good. It's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful country. Everything's going well. And then I got up to check the tape because I hadn't been familiar with the camera. Popped it out, put it in the player, and we sat there and watched me doing this little narration about how good it was, how nice it was. Gunfire going off in the background. And we'd gotten so used to it, it never fazed me. I was making a recording for my parents saying, what a great time we're having, and it's a beautiful place. And there's boom, 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 bang, 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 all in the background. So that tape never went home. The seizure at Tranquilandia stemmed from a combination of a precursor chemical investigation where we tracked DEA, not we in Bogota, but DEA tracked the precursors that were being utilized by the Colombian cartels to manufacture cocaine. It went to a site in the middle of the Amazon jungle near the equator in Colombia that nobody knew about. Nobody ever got intelligence about it or anything else. That combined with, I think, if I recall correctly, a pilot got lost or got off route or something and flew over this site and saw these landing strips, these pistas in the middle of the jungle, carved out of the jungle undergrowth. And that trickled in. We had that information, plus the tracking of the precursor chemicals. As a result, about 12.5 tons of cocaine in various processes, from base to hydrochloride, was found under the triple jungle canopy in the middle of Colombia, in the middle of the jungle. We went down there. We gave the intelligence to the Colombia National Police. They mounted a raid. This was about March of 1994. They went in there with helicopters and a single twin otter with their troops to raid it. And they encountered resistance. They encountered resistance because at the time, the FARC, the Armed Revolutionary Forces of Colombia, were providing protection to the cultivations for the traffickers. And it turned into about a 2-day gunfight where they estimated 100 FARC resistors fighting off the police. And what they'd done was put 55-gallon drums, the empty drums from the precursor chemicals, along these pistas, these runways, to avoid the aircraft from being able to land. Because when they were smuggling drugs, they would know when their pilots were coming in. They'd move the drums, a plane would land, they'd load it up, they'd take off. Well, when the cops went into raid, the drums were on there, they couldn't land. So what they did was they landed helicopters, at the time as Bell 212 helicopters, at each end of the strip. They cleared, under gunfire, under fire from the FARCs and other resistors, they cleared the drums, and then the Twin Otter came in and unloaded, I forget what they carried, maybe 40, 45 cops, and then the thing went on like that. Yeah, it was, I wasn't there for the initial assault. One of the other guys in the office was, Ron Pettingill, and he went in on the initial raid. And then I was sent down a couple days later, I don't know, maybe a week or two later, to clean it up. And we went in with the police and blew everything up, torched everything. The landing strips, the complex, the living quarters, the dining quarters, all that kind of stuff. And the thing that was ironic, or not ironic, but interesting to me at the time, I'd go out on these things, I'd be the only American. I'd be the only DEA guy, and this was pre-body armor, I'd be out doing these things in a golf shirt and blue jeans with a pistol on my hip, and that was it. And it's so good to see how far we've come in the last, what's it been, 40 years, longer than that in some cases, but to protect our agents and protect people and have, you know, the special forces alignment, to have the training and do things like that, which initiated or was initiated long after I was out of there. But yeah, I had fun. Well, because I've been the one guy down there during all the destruction, the raids and everything, I was designated to come to Washington and testify before the commission, basically to the nexus between the FARC, the Armed Revolutionary Forces of Colombia, the guerrilla group that was trying to overthrow the government, and the cartels, the drug traffickers, the protection rackets, this type of thing. This was before the FARC and some of those other groups got actively involved in their own cocaine processing and dealing and smuggling and so forth. At that point in time, they were pretty much protectors. They were, and so my testimony involved establishing that connection, identifying Carlos later, Pablo Escobar on the airstrips in Nicaragua during the Iran-Contra fiascos going on at the same time. And they had photographs that were taken during that whole operation. So I physically identified those people, those cartel members, from the photographs that had been taken that CI-initiated mission to Nicaragua, along with the raids and so forth that I had been involved in Colombia, but essentially the ties between the communist FARC and the cartels. Louis Tams was a very, about Pablo Escobar trying to assassinate the U.S. ambassador, Louis Tams. Louis Tams was a professor from Arizona State University. He was a conservative. He was a Barry Goldwater conservative that Ronald Reagan appointed as U.S. ambassador to Colombia. He came into country and he was a proponent of extraditing Colombian nationals to the United States to face prosecution. There was a lot of pushback because of the nationalism and so forth in Colombia, and obviously Escobar, later the Ochoas, the other families down there with the cartels didn't want to hear this kind of stuff, and they certainly didn't want to be reading about it on the pages of El Tiempo or the daily papers in Bogota. So Tams was a lightning rod, and through his tenure, through 83, 84, there was a lot of stuff going on that brought him to the attention of the cartels, including the visit of former Administrator Francis Mullen came down. Several months later, Deputy Administrator Jack Lawn at the time, before he became administrator, he visited, and they would meet with the Minister of Justice, a man by the name of Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, and convinced him that the extradition was a good thing, that they would. So President Betancourt at the time, Belisario Betancourt was the president of Colombia, he agreed to extradite Colombian nationals. Well, that resulted in Escobar trying to assassinate Ambassador Tams. I happened to have an informant that was pretty good informant, and he gave me information that he had been at a meeting in the jungles with Escobar and other leaders of the cartel, and Escobar had discussed trying to assassinate Luis. Well, one thing led to another. We identified Luis as Louis Tams, the U.S. ambassador, and he wasn't a participant in the actual discussions, but he was on the periphery of this meeting. He gave me the details, and of course, that became questionable immediately. But we had a polygrapher. Both the CIA and DEA sent separate polygraphers to Colombia to put this guy on the box, passed them all. So that's when we put the classified information out, sent it to the State Department, DEA, and so forth. And as a result, Tams was evacuated from Colombia, right? Christmas of 1984. They pulled him and his family out and replaced him. So that was the long and the short of that informant. It was good information, and it probably could have saved the ambassador's life, because Escobar was later successful in assassinating the Minister of Justice, to whom the ambassador was speaking and the administrators had been speaking. The contract on former Administrator Mullen and the initiation of Colombian hit squads against DEA agents domestically, the information was originated by the same informant that had given me the information on the attempt to, or the plan to assassinate the ambassador. So he had some credibility, and this happened within just 2 or 3 weeks of each other. These issues came up. I just happened to be the control agent on this informant. Ironically, he had been a walk-in when I got there. I was a new agent in Bogota, and he was a walk-in and just turned in to be a really good informant. But as to the, he's not the one that told us directly about the contract on Administrator Mullen per se. We had multiple sources that were feeding that, and the long and the short of it was $350,000 for Administrator Mullen was the contract for his death. The information my informant told me was about the hit squads. And in a like manner as to the information about the ambassador assassination attempt, he said that they were planning to create squads, special teams, 5-man teams, and deploy them into the United States and target DEA agents. When they could identify them, they would target them. Again, he was polygraphed, and again, he passed it. So classified cables went out, to everybody concerned, to DEA headquarters and so forth, giving them a heads up, and warning, and so on. The thing that was a little bit disappointing to me as being the control agent on this and the guy writing the cables was the next day in San Francisco and Boston, there were press conferences called by DEA agents claiming that they were personally targeted with these hit squads. Well, we didn't have that level of information, that detail, and I don't know what was going on, but what it did was it compromised my CI, because there was a very, very close, very small group of people discussing this stuff. So immediately, the following day, after the U.S. press conferences, El Tiempo in Bogota, the daily newspaper, picked it up. And it was on the front page, or there, but close thereby. And they started talking about Colombian cartel hit squads and so forth. Well, then the questions of the cartel were, who's talking? Where are they getting this information? And that brought a lot of heat down on my informant. Fortunately, he was not harmed. He was, taken care of and gotten out of harm's way. But the compromise of what had been classified information going out of the embassy gave us some cause for concern in Colombia, probably unbeknownst of the domestic offices, but yeah, it stirred some stuff up. We were evacuated from Colombia in 1985 as a result of all the violence that was going on. The State Department made a determination that Bogota would become, actually we had already put the staffs from Medellin, Cali, and Barranquilla offices into Bogota because of things going on. Well, the State Department decided to make it an adult-only post. In other words, if you had kids, no kids were going to stay there. And so most families who had children were either evacuated. In some cases, this was across the board. This was State Department, every U.S. government agency involved. Sometimes the direct hire employee would remain, but usually the family would leave. So as a result of that, they started doing that kind of around the time of the attempted assassination, or talked about assassination on Tams. Late 1984, thereabouts, and they started with high school kids. All the ones that were obviously Americans, they were out and about, they were going to high school. They started evacuating those families. And then it slowly got to the point where after the first of 85 and into the spring of 85, they were getting down to kindergarten and pre-kindergarten children, families, and so forth. And that's where we fell. So at that point, at the time, Deputy Administrator Lawn came down to talk to us each about what we wanted to do. Stay overseas, come back home, that type of thing. I actually was angling for a job vacancy in Istanbul, Turkey, because I knew I had to come out of Colombia. My wife was originally Bulgarian. There was still a communist government in Bulgaria. Her parents were there. And I figured if I could get a posting in Istanbul, it was close to Bulgaria, so at some point in time, maybe the walls would come down and she could get over to visit her parents. I politicked, I lobbied it, whatever. Bottom line was, they had sent me to language school for 2 years, or for 20 weeks to learn Spanish. I had been in Colombia for 2 years. There was a 6-year cap on overseas service before you had to come back to a domestic post of duty. So they said, no, Turkish, it's a year-long language school. It's not worth the time, effort, whatever. We can't do that. So I got a call from headquarters, and the call offered me a job in Pakistan. And my wife and I talked about it over the weekend, decided we'd been in Colombia for 2 years, we'd go anywhere. We'll try it. The appeal to the job in Pakistan was I was, as you said, the advisor to the Joint Narcotics Task Force in Punjab province. The history behind that was State Department wanted to raise its profile in Pakistan, so they wanted to fund additional positions, 4 positions in the country: Peshawar, Karachi, Lahore, and Islamabad. Well, they came to a deal where DEA would man the positions with DEA special agents. State Department would pay for it. They'd pay the housing, the car, the expenses, the operating expenses, and so forth. So that's the job. I got the job in Lahore. And when I transferred to Pakistan, my charge was to essentially create a task force with Pakistani law enforcement personnel. And when I got there, there was 1 cop assigned to this task force. In the first year, we built it up to about 20 and made record seizures. We seized the first heroin-producing lab in Punjab province ever. We did a lot of seizures, a lot of foreign deliveries, controlled deliveries, and so forth. So it was an experience. It was a cultural experience. I mean, the other side of the world, and all of a sudden you're in a totally different environment. But again, like Colombia, it was great for me. I enjoyed it. It was tough on the family, and that was a theme throughout some of our overseas postings. But yeah, 3 years in Pakistan, and then on from there. When I went from Pakistan to San Juan, Puerto Rico, it was as a result of a promotion to a GS-14. I was a group supervisor in San Juan. San Juan had essentially 3 groups. They had a task force group that was based on Fort Buchanan, a local military base. They had the enforcement group, which I took over, and they had a diversion group, a couple of diversion investigators, and manager, and so forth. So when I went to San Juan, it was a wake-up call for me, because suddenly I was a supervisor. And you have to remember that for 7 years, I hadn't been on the street. I hadn't put cuffs on anybody. I hadn't been in a court to testify for 7 years, because I was 3 years in Pakistan. I was 2 years in Colombia prior to that. And before I went overseas, I was at the El Paso Intelligence Center working on intelligence products and projects for 2 years. So number one, Puerto Rico is a commonwealth of the United States. It's governed by all federal laws. So the Controlled Substances Act applied, all domestic enforcement applied. So it was a catch-up for me. It was get back to what do you do domestically, plus the fact I had a group of, it ranged from 12 to 18 agents, DEA agents, plus 2 or 3 Puerto Rico cops assigned to it. So everybody, it was an outstanding group. We had some very innovative agents. We had experienced agents. We had new agents willing to learn. One guy came out of the academy straight to San Juan, and within a year was responsible for a cash seizure of almost $14 million, a single cash seizure. So we had a lot of stuff going on. It was very successful. We made record seizures. We did a case, a heroin case on a spin-off of the old French Connection. We did cocaine cases out of the Ochoa family in Colombia. And plus there was a post of duty. we had a single man posted duty when I got there in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, which was part of the AOR, as well as all the down islands, the islands in the Western Caribbean, British Virgin Islands, the Dutch Antilles, various places where we'd liaise and work cases and so forth. So it subsequently went to a two-man posted duty in St. Thomas, but it was, the group got the Administrator's Award for group achievement, and a couple of us were fortunate enough to get actually the Administrator's Award of Honor. So it was a very, very productive 3 years that I spent in San Juan. I can, but actually the diversion, I worked just 1999 and 2000, right at the end of my career, because I did 6 years, 6.5 years in India as a country attaché between San Juan, Puerto Rico, and headquarters. So during that period of time, I had a 5-country AOR. I also had India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. So during that period of time was one of my really first introductions, if you will, to diversion and how diversion worked. Because going all the way back to just after World War II, opium production was legal. It was licit in India and in Turkey. And the United States passed a law that gave 80% of the opium that it would purchase to India and Turkey. It was called the 80-20 rule. And then the rest of it, the other 20%, was divvied up between Tasmania and Australia, France, 1 or 2 other countries, maybe Germany. So while I was in India, one of the primary things I did, in addition to enforcement operations and coordinating with local police in these different countries, was work with diversion. Because diversion was very concerned with literally the diversion of opium, of licit opium into the black market. And they were also concerned about the chemicals, the precursor chemicals that were being used next door in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so forth. So we got very involved. I would be out on the ground with a GPS locator in the Himalayas. I'd be up in the mountains, North India border with China, with the narcotics commissioner from India, looking for opium cultivations. Because at that point in time, they had overflights. They had the eye in the sky, and they'd send out intelligence, and they'd say, well, we have these huge opium cultivations going on here and here, and I'd go out there. I'd say, well, somebody's missing something somewhere, because I'm physically standing at the coordinates you gave me, and there's some mom and pop thing, you know. They're growing opium, yeah, but it's no big cultivation. So that was my introduction to diversion, and then I got into it more and more from India. So after 6.5 years in India and doing everything that happened there, I came back to headquarters. And the first 6 months in headquarters, I was a staff coordinator in international operations. And then at the end of that 6 months, the first of 1999, I was promoted to section chief at the Office of Diversion. And at that point, I was the only agent section chief. There were 7 sections. You had the deputy administrator, deputy assistant administrator, head of diversion at the time, Gene Hayslip, who was an amazing guy. But then I had an international unit and a domestic unit under chemicals. And that's what I did. Anything that used precursor chemicals to manufacture narcotics was essentially our bailiwick. We went internationally. We went across the country, San Francisco meth labs. We went around the world to different things, conferences, whatever. So diversion was a very far-reaching responsibility. They had tremendous successes. They created, I remember one Operation Purple specifically targeted the precursor chemicals for methamphetamine, ephedrine, Sudafed, things like that, that were used in methamphetamine. And over a period of time, they subsequently merged, I think, with because you used to have drug desks. You had the heroin desk, the cocaine desk, the dangerous drugs desk. And I think after I retired, they merged the chemicals of diversion with the dangerous drug desk, and it became one. Because one of the guys that worked with me, one of the agents in New Delhi, subsequently became the head of that section. So, but yeah, I had nothing but good to say, good experience with diversion and its leadership. Very effective. When I retired in September of 2000, I was offered a job with Computer Sciences Corporation, CSC, here in Crystal City, Pentagon City. They had a contract with DEA International Operations to support the Sensitive Investigative Unit program. What that was it originated in the Andean region with Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and then Mexico. Those were the 4 original countries. And we would identify foreign national police officers that we thought would be well suited or qualified for special units, recruit them, bring them to Quantico and train them, and then put them back out in the field in their countries, their home countries, and create these special units that would report, well, not report to, but work closely with DEA agents in country that were stationed in embassies or consulates or whatever. And the original thrust of that program was primarily intercept, electronic intercept type things. Because throughout those years, the traffickers, wherever they might be, had far superior electronic equipment, phones, cell phones, stuff, than we did. They didn't have to go by a shopping list. They didn't have budgets. They bought the best on the market. So our problem was to intercept their communications. And the SIU program was initiated in concert with DOD, NSA, other agencies to get high-level equipment, but it required U.S. citizens to monitor it, to oversee it. So these units would do the groundwork. They would go out and run down the leads and everything. But it was a very, very successful integrated effort. And then expanded around the world. I mean, we have, I think I read that the number of countries got up to 20, I believe, at some point a few years ago. And then I think currently it's got 12 countries. But if I'm not incorrect, I think the DEA SIU unit in Pakistan led to a lot of the support post 9/11, when the on-the-ground reactions and connections and stuff like that, because DEA has the best sources anywhere in the world. I mean, DEA is the best. Always was, and hopefully it always will be. I mean, there's nobody that can hold a candle to DEA cultivating sources of information.